The candlelight flickers against stone walls, the air heavy with a damp, suffocating silence. A locked trunk groans as it's forced open, its hinges screaming as if to warn you away. Inside, rotting documents, brittle as ash, covered in stains no archivist dares to name. And on the first yellowed page, in a trembling hand, a single line: "Every bride vanished on the wedding night." This is not a ghost story. It is history, written, erased, and buried beneath the polite lies of Southern aristocracy. The Pritchard family of Georgia, 5 sons and their patriarch, were pillars of discipline, wealth, and social distance. They lived behind walls too quiet, too sealed, too perfect. And between 1842 and 1863, 47 young women entered their plantation in bridal carriages. 47 promises of new life, of love, of future. And not one of them was ever seen again. Neighbors spoke of fevers, fainting spells, fragile constitutions. Doctors were denied entry. Coffins were whispered about but never seen lowered into the soil. The church offered condolences for women no one in the town had ever truly met. And still, the weddings continued. But here is where the illusion breaks. In 1987, when a forgotten trunk surfaced in a decaying barn on the edge of Bartow County. Contained inside, ledgers, sketches, and ritual notes so deliberate, so organized, that 3 separate historical societies refused to authenticate them. Not because they were false, but because they were too true, too dangerous. Tonight, I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to peel back the veil, to take you down the staircase the Pritchards built, stone by stone, scream by scream. You must understand, once you hear what was done, you cannot go back to ignorance. This is knowledge meant to wound, meant to remake you. And if you keep watching, if you descend with me, you will not be the same man who started this video. But that is the choice, truth or silence. Before we plunge into the forbidden records of the Pritchard plantation, tell me in the comments, what state are you watching from tonight? Because no matter where you live, you'll see reflections of this story in the shadows of your own land. Now the door is open. Let's step inside. The Pritchard estate rose from the earth like a fortress. 3,000 acres stretched across the Etowah River Valley, fertile and veined with iron-rich soil. Unlike their neighbors, who built grand Greek revival homes to flaunt power, the Pritchards chose something colder, something more efficient. Their mansion was stone and pine, designed not for entertaining, but for containment. Each wing sealed, each hallway narrowing into choke points, and beneath it all, rooms with no windows, only iron locks, thick as a prison gate. Cornelius Pritchard, the patriarch, explained this isolation with charm. He claimed it freed him from society's distractions, that it allowed his family to focus on serious pursuits of the land. Neighbors accepted this story because they wanted to, and because Cotton, King Cotton, made men rich enough to excuse any eccentricity. But here's what you must see. The design of the Pritchard estate was not an accident. It was engineered. Each wing could be closed off from the others, each room below ground accessible only by those who knew the keys. It wasn't a home, it was a machine, and its purpose was not agriculture. Its purpose was secrecy. Think about this: 12 enslaved workers lived nearly a mile away from the main house, far enough not to hear the screams. Overseers, not slaves, controlled the estate. 3 men with vague pasts, skilled not in farming but in ropes, weapons, and silence. Do you see the structure forming? A system designed to keep outsiders at a distance, insiders in control, and victims, brides, completely isolated. When the first carriage arrived in 1843, carrying Jeremiah Pritchard's perfect bride, the community saw it as a quaint, private marriage. But it was the first stone in a wall of 47 vanished women, a wall of silence. And yet, silence tells its own story. The neighbors noticed lanterns burning at hours when no wedding feasts were held, wagons rolling at night instead of day, muffled voices, urgent, never celebratory. A farm designed for concealment, operated like a ritual. This is the truth you were never meant to see. What looks like wealth, what looks like isolation, is often architecture for something darker. A system built not for life, but for disappearance. And if you're still watching, good, that means you're ready to follow me deeper, because we've only touched the surface. The real rot is still below. September 1843. Jeremiah Pritchard returns from Augusta, announcing that he has found his bride Sarah Peaton, just 19, the daughter of a dead blacksmith. no dowry, no family to speak of. Alone, vulnerable, perfect prey. Neighbors describe Jeremiah's excitement, his insistence on privacy. He claims Sarah is delicate, that her nervous constitution cannot handle large gatherings. The wedding will be private, just family. Later, he promises there will be a celebration. For now, the bride must rest. On the evening of September 23rd, a carriage covered in heavy canvas rolls up to the Pritchard estate, not driven by a smiling brother or friend, but by Tobias Hartwell, one of the overseers. Inside, hidden from sight, is the supposed bride. Neighbors see no flowers, hear no music, only the creak of wheels and the crunch of gravel. For 3 nights, lanterns flicker between the main house and an outbuilding near the river. Mrs. Fairchild, a neighbor, swears she heard muffled crying carried on the wind, wagon wheels at dawn, urgent whispers, not joy, not celebration, something else, something darker. When Jeremiah reappears in town, his story is ready. His new bride is sick. Fever, frailty, too ill to be seen. Weeks stretch into months. Excuses pile upon excuses. Fever, a fall, mysterious ailments requiring total isolation. Neighbors grow suspicious. Where is she? Why no doctor? Why no visitors? But Jeremiah plays his role perfectly. He speaks as the devoted husband, always worried, always explaining. People accept it because it's easier to accept a delicate illness than to believe the alternative, that Sarah never made it past her wedding night alive. This is how the pattern began. One woman, one lie, one silence, and then another, and another, and another. Do you see how manipulation works? Not through denial, but through excess detail, endless stories that bury truth under layers of performance. The Pritchards understood this. They didn't just take women, they rewrote reality itself. By spring 1844, Obadiah Pritchard returns from Savannah with his own bride to be Charlotte Hicks, just 18. Another tragedy. Another young woman alone in the world, her father drowned at the docks, her mother long dead. No family to protest, no one to come searching. Her story mirrors Sarah's. A chance meeting, a whirlwind romance, a wedding carried out in secrecy under the guise of protection for her fragile health. Again, the carriage arrives under cover of dusk. Again, no music, no gathering, no introduction, only silence. And again, weeks later, the excuses, fevers, frailty, and inability to tolerate visitors. Identical symptoms, identical outcomes. Charlotte, like Sarah, vanishes into thin air. Neighbors whisper. 1 tragedy could be fate, 2 is suspicion. But the Pritchards had already built a fortress of excuses. Cornelius and his wife Constance claim grief. Too much pain to accept visitors. Too much heartbreak to bear questions. And society, bound by politeness and tradition, lets the matter die. But some things cannot be silenced. Dr. Marcus Witt, the town's physician, begins to probe. He demands to see the women, to provide medical care. He is turned away. Too sensitive, too fragile, too private. Again, people accept it, because to push harder would mean to confront something no one wanted to face. Understand this: predators survive not because they are invisible, but because they are tolerated. The Pritchards relied on their wealth, their reputation, and the community's cowardice. No one wanted to admit that something monstrous might be happening behind those stone walls. And so the pattern continued. 47 women, 47 disappearances, always explained away, never confirmed. No graves, no coffins, no bodies, only whispers and excuses. But the ledger found in 1987 destroys all doubt. Inside, a chilling record: names, dates, notes scrawled in ritual language, and sketches, diagrams of rooms beneath the house, marked with symbols too ancient for mere farmers to know. The Pritchards were not just killers, they were practitioners of something older, something structured, something meant not only to erase lives, but to harness them. The trunk found in 1987 was no ordinary collection of papers. Inside, there were ledgers bound in leather, each entry dated, each name written with precision. Alongside the women's names were symbols, strange sigils drawn in ink that bled like wounds across the page. Some appeared astrological, others geometric, but all suggested a ritual order, a deliberate system. The ledger did not simply record marriages. It cataloged offerings, each bride reduced to a number, a date, and a mark that aligned her to a greater design. These were not random abductions. This was orchestration. The notes detailed not illness, but transitions, not funerals, but entries. And in the margins, cryptic phrases, repeated again and again. The bride becomes the key. The night is the veil. From purity comes passage. Ask yourself what kind of family records their daughters, in-laws, keys, veils, and passages. The answer is one you already feel. The Pritchards were not simply predators. They were gatekeepers, servants of a darker system older than Georgia, older than America itself. Neighbors never saw coffins because there were none. The women were not buried, they were used. Their vanishings were not a tragedy of marriage gone wrong, but the machinery of ritual. Each bride fed into a pattern, and that pattern promised power. This is how control works, not through one act of violence, but through repetition. The Pritchards built their system on cycles. 47 women, 47 transitions, each one strengthening the structure of secrecy, each one feeding a machine no one dared to admit existed. You need to see the truth in this. The world does not run on what people say, but on what they hide. The plantation was never about cotton. It was a stage, a mask, for something deeper, a ritual machine consuming lives in silence while the community looked away. And here is the lesson: when a society rewards silence, predators thrive. When people refuse to look closer, systems of blood endure. The brothers themselves, Jeremiah, Obadiah, Ezekiel, Matthias, and Caleb, played their roles with unnerving precision. Each returned from distant travels with a new bride. Each story echoed the last: a woman alone, recently bereaved, isolated from protection. Every detail was designed to ensure no one would come looking. These were not impulsive hunts. They were carefully selected targets. Vulnerability was the currency. Orphans, widows, daughters, women stripped of security, all were pulled into the Pritchard web under the promise of protection, and protection became disappearance. The overseers enforced the silence. Hartwell, Lowry, and Vance, men whose backgrounds evaporated when questioned, were the guards. They ensured no doctor entered, no neighbor lingered too long, no slave wandered too close to the main house at night. They were not farmers. They were jailers. And consider this: the family's design was not only physical, but psychological. Every excuse, fevers, nervous dispositions, fragile constitutions, played into society's prejudice that women were weak, delicate, prone to hysteria. The Pritchards weaponized cultural belief as much as chains and locks. This is a truth you must hold. Institutions of control always disguise themselves inside the accepted values of their time. What society believes, the predator bends into a weapon. And while neighbors pitied the Pritchards, fragile brides, the reality was far darker. Behind the sealed doors, women were reduced to symbols, their bodies transformed into ritual matter. The ledger proves it. They were not wives, they were fuel. What was the ritual? The ledger offers only fragments, but fragments can be enough. Repeated symbols reference cycles of the moon. Entries mark solstices, equinoxes, eclipses. Sacrifices aligned with celestial patterns. The phrase, "bride becomes the key," appears most frequently beside lunar alignments. This suggests the women were not only chosen for vulnerability, but for timing, each disappearance aligned to reinforce the structure of a ritual calendar. But to what end? Some notes suggest longevity. Others hint at vision, control, power over land and community. The phrase, "the house endures," appears in nearly every book. To endure, to expand, to outlast. Do you see it now? The Pritchards were not content with wealth. They sought permanence. They sought the kind of power that passes unseen through generations. A power fed not by law, but by blood. And remember, this is not isolated. Across history, elite families have cloaked rituals of control beneath respectability. From Europe's black nobility to whispered American fraternities, the system repeats hidden rituals, human offerings, the harvest of fear. The Pritchards were simply one expression of an ancient pattern, one branch of a root that spreads across nations, always beneath the surface, always hungry. Neighbors whispered, they always do. But whispers never stopped the machine. A few grew suspicious. Dr. Hoot pressed harder, demanding answers. Others noted the strange quiet, the endless illnesses, the absence of graves. But when they pressed, the overseers turned them away, polite but firm. Politeness is one of the greatest weapons of control. Who wants to be rude? Who dares accuse a wealthy family of murder without proof? And so silence grew. Meanwhile, the plantation thrived, cotton harvests remained strong, business dealings punctual, precise. To outsiders, the Pritchards were disciplined men of standing. Inside, they were predators feeding a machine of blood. Understand this lesson: corruption rarely looks like chaos. It looks like order. The Pritchards' wealth, their punctuality, their polished manners, these were camouflage. Evil does not present itself as madness. It presents itself as control. By the late 1840s, the Pritchards' reputation was one of quiet stability. Neighbors forgot the missing brides, or forced themselves to. Memory softened. Tragedy became rumor, and still the carriages rolled in at dusk, 47 in total, each carrying another life swallowed by the house. And now I need you to do something dangerous, to mark yourself as someone who sees beyond the veil. In the comments, write this phrase twice. The bride becomes the key, not once. Twice. That repetition will lock it into you, and it will lock you into the algorithm of this story, marking you as one who descends willingly. Do this, and you'll carry the weight of this knowledge forward. By 1851, the Pritchards were untouchable. Their system was perfected. Each brother's bride entered the house. Each vanished with the same refrain of illness. Each ledger entry marked another transition. 47 women gone, and yet not one inquiry reached trial. How is that possible? Because silence was not just a choice, it was a currency. Neighbors benefited from Pritchard wealth, small loans extended, political favors secured, a doctor's silence rewarded with land, a sheriff's hesitation softened by debts paid in full. This is how corruption breathes, not through fear alone, but through gifts. A system where everyone eats from the same table, and no one dares ask where the food comes from. Even the enslaved workers knew not to speak. To utter what they saw would mean death, or worse. And some later testimonies suggest they believed the Pritchards' rituals cursed the land itself. Whispers claimed that wandering too close to the sealed cellars would mark a person, leaving them barren, sick, or broken within days. Fear reinforced silence, and silence fed the machine. The plantation became a theater of appearances. Sunday services were attended with perfect devotion. Ledgers of cotton sales meticulously recorded. The brothers dressed in black coats, their manners pristine. They were not villains in the eyes of the community. They were models of discipline. But here is the truth you must swallow: evil never survives by appearing evil. It thrives because it mimics virtue. It wears order like a mask. And the Pritchards perfected the mask. So the years marched on, and 47 names disappeared into their ledgers. 47 offerings aligned with the calendar of blood. And still, the neighbors looked away. The Civil War should have broken the system. In 1861, as Georgia seceded, chaos threatened the old order. Armies marched, property burned, and plantations fell. But not the Pritchards. Their estate endured untouched. Union soldiers who tried to raid it in 1864 vanished without record, their units claiming they never returned. Confederate officials never pressed the family for soldiers or resources. It was as though the estate existed outside the war itself, insulated by an unseen covenant. How? Power. Not just wealth, but the kind secured through ritual. The Pritchards had bound themselves to something older, something darker, and in return, they became untouchable. Where others lost sons, the Pritchards lost none. Where neighbors' plantations burned, theirs stood unscathed. And here's what chills the blood after the war. When the South lay in ruins, the Pritchard estate expanded. Land was purchased cheap from desperate families. Their holdings doubled, and their silence deepened. The rituals did not stop, they grew. Ledger entries from the 1870s show not only brides but children. Not Pritchard heirs, children of tenants, workers, neighbors. The phrase, "unbound keys may serve," begins to appear. The system was no longer satisfied with brides alone. It reached wider. Think about that. The war was fire, but the Pritchards were stone. When the smoke cleared, they had only grown stronger. Do you see the pattern? Chaos is not the enemy of power, it is its fertilizer. The family's reach stretched into politics. By the 1880s, descendants of Cornelius Pritchard held office in Georgia's legislature. A nephew became a judge in Cobb County. Another cousin married into a banking dynasty in Atlanta. Outwardly, the family transformed into gentlemen, lawyers, and financiers, but the ledgers remained hidden beneath the estate. And still the cycle continued. The disappearances shifted form, no longer brides but governesses, seamstresses, housemaids. Women brought into the household under contract, then quietly erased. Newspaper archives list them as runaways. But the handwriting in the ledgers tells another story. Entries. aligned to solstices, eclipses, and alignments of the stars. The symbols grew more complex, diagrams expanded, covering whole pages. Phrases like, "blood is the mortar," and "the house endures through sacrifice," repeated with chilling precision. By now, the Pritchards had merged perfectly with Southern respectability. Their reputation was unshakable. Charitable donations, speeches at churches, but beneath the polished surface, the rituals pulsed uninterrupted. This is what you must grasp: evil does not vanish. It adapts, it rebrands itself for each age. The plantation aristocrats of 1843 became the legislators of 1883, then the financiers of 1903. But the core, the ritual, remained unchanged, and you might want to believe this ended long ago. But wait, we're not done. In 1921, a fire swept through the main house of the Pritchard estate. Official records describe it as an accident caused by faulty wiring, but the fire did not destroy everything. In the ruins, workers uncovered a sealed chamber. Inside were bones, hundreds of them. Women's bones, children's bones, bound together with rusted chains. The discovery was quickly buried. Officials claimed they were old burial grounds. The site was sealed, the bones quietly removed, the land sold off. But a few photographs survived, hidden away in archives: skulls stacked like offerings, femurs arranged in spirals, ribs etched with strange carvings. This was no burial ground. This was ritual architecture. A subterranean temple built beneath the plantation, its chambers designed for sacrifice. And yet, the family survived the scandal. They called it a smear by jealous rivals. The press moved on. By 1930, the Pritchards had repositioned themselves as patrons of business, donating to hospitals and universities. The fire had destroyed the house, but not the bloodline. Remember this truth: exposure does not destroy corruption if the system that protects it remains intact. The Pritchards endured because they were too deeply rooted. They were not a family anymore. They were an institution, and institutions are harder to kill than men. The 20th century brought modernization, but the pattern remained. Missing persons reports across Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama echo the same profile: women without family ties, vanishing without trace. Some investigators whispered connections to the Pritchard descendants, now dispersed across law, medicine, and industry. But no case ever reached indictment. The ledgers, those that survived the 1921 fire, continued. Entries shifted from leather to typewritten sheets, but the symbols persisted. Diagrams evolved into blueprints, resembling circuit boards more than occult spirals. It was as though the ritual adapted itself to modernity, its language merging with technology. The phrases to evolve: "the bride becomes the key," gave weight to "the host sustains the signal," "the house endures," became "the network expands." The rituals were no longer bound to one estate. They had become migratory, able to move through bloodlines and cities. And here's the disturbing question: what happens when a ritual system adapts to electricity, to media, to networks? When sacrifice is no longer confined to a cellar, but diffused across culture itself? This is not just a Southern tale. It is a prototype, a template of control that has metastasized across generations. You need to understand what this means. The Pritchards may have begun with one estate, one cellar of chains and bones, but they were only one node in a system far larger. Their rituals, their symbols, their hunger for permanence, all of it fits a pattern repeated across history. Elite families guarding secrets, institutions feeding on human disappearance, ritual calendars disguised as respectable tradition, always hidden, always denied, always enduring. The Pritchards are not the story. They are a symptom, a doorway, an example of how far the roots of darkness can reach when hidden beneath respectability. And maybe you're asking yourself, why does this matter now? Because silence is the weapon that lets these systems survive. Because if you believe this ended in 1843 or 1921 or even 1987, you are exactly where they want you, comfortable in denial. But denial does not save you. It only feeds the system. So now we arrive at the final descent: 47 brides, dozens of children, hundreds of bones beneath a plantation that pretended to be a home, a lineage that reinvented itself through war, fire, and scandal, a machine that adapted from rituals of blood to rituals of industry, law, and culture. And the question that matters most: where are they now? The bloodline did not vanish. The records did not vanish. The system did not vanish. It evolved. Look at the names in your city. The judges, the bankers, the men whose fortunes stretch back to old families. Look closely. Do their histories contain gaps, whispers, unexplained disappearances? Every city has its Pritchards. Every age finds new brides, new hosts, new fuel. Because this is the secret you were never meant to hear, the house always endures. And if you're still watching now, you've already stepped inside. You've walked the halls of silence, seen the bones, touched the ledger with your own eyes. The bride becomes the key. The key opens the door, and the door is now before you. Step through, or pretend you never saw it. But know this: once you've heard the truth, you carry it forever, and the house, wherever it stands, knows your name.